The fluorescent hospital lights hummed above me like angry wasps as I stared at my phone screen. 3:17 a.m., 47 missed calls. All to my children. All unanswered. My name is Elena Martinez, and I'm 58 years old. For 3 decades, I was the person everyone called when their world fell apart. The mom who dropped everything when my daughter Mara had her breakdown in college. The sister who flew across 2 states when Claire's husband left her. The mother who spent her savings keeping my son David afloat through his artistic phase that lasted 5 years. I was their lifeline, their safety net, their sure thing. But tonight, lying in this sterile hospital bed with tubes in my arm and machines monitoring every heartbeat, I realized something that made my chest tighten more than any medical procedure could. I had become completely, utterly invisible to the people I loved most. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. The heart monitor beeped steadily beside me, each sound marking another second of silence from my family. I scrolled through my call log with trembling fingers. Mara called 6 times. David called 12 times. Claire called 8 times. Even my ex-husband Robert called 3 times. My neighbor Joyce called 16 times. None of them had called me back. 2 beds over, an elderly woman held her daughter's hand while they whispered about discharge plans. "Don't worry, Mom," the daughter said softly. "I took the whole week off. You're not going through this alone." I turned away, hot tears sliding down my cheeks. The doctor had used words like complications and extended stay and "you'll need help at home." I'd nodded through the medical jargon, but all I could think about was who I would call, who would be there when I needed them. For the first time in my adult life, the answer was no one. I thought about last Tuesday when Mara called sobbing because her promotion got delayed. I stayed on the phone for 2 hours, missing my book club to comfort her. I thought about last month when David needed just $500 for rent because his art wasn't selling. I transferred the money before he finished asking. I thought about 6 months ago when Claire's real estate deal fell through and she needed someone to co-sign her new apartment lease. "You're the only one I trust, Elena," she'd said. "You always come through." I always came through. But where were they now? The nurse had asked earlier, with that gentle, practiced voice they use for patients without visitors. "Is your family coming tonight, honey?" I'd lied. "They're on their way." She'd smiled and patted my hand. "That's good. Nobody should be alone at a time like this." 6 hours later, I was still alone. I set my phone on the bedside table and closed my eyes, listening to the sounds of the hospital around me. Somewhere down the hall, a family was laughing softly with their loved one. Somewhere else, I could hear the murmur of gentle conversation. My room was silent, except for the machines keeping track of my vital signs. I always thought family meant forever. I thought it meant showing up. I thought it meant that after 30 years of being everyone's emergency contact, someone would be mine. I was wrong. And as I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling tiles and listening to my own heartbeat on the monitor, I realized this was the moment everything would change. This was the night I would stop being Elena the rescuer, Elena the reliable one, Elena the woman who disappeared into everyone else's needs. This was the night I would finally start learning who Elena Martinez really was when she stopped being everything to everyone else. I just didn't know it yet. Looking back, I can pinpoint exactly when I became the family's everything. It was 15 years ago, when my mother was dying of cancer, and I was the one who moved her into my guest room. Not Claire, who lived 20 minutes away. Not our brother Marcus, who was too busy with work. Me. I fed Mom her medication, held her hand through chemo, and slept on the floor beside her bed when the pain got bad. When she passed, Mara sobbed into my shoulder. "Mom, I don't know what we would have done without you." Claire nodded through her tears. "You're our rock, Elena. You always know what to do." That's when it started. Or maybe that's when I noticed how good it felt to be needed. The phone calls came like clockwork after that. Mara, fresh out of college and drowning in her first marketing job. "Mom, my boss hates me. I think I'm going to get fired. I'd talk her through every workplace drama, every self-doubt, every career decision. When she got promoted 2 years later, she sent me flowers with a card. To the best life coach a daughter could ask for. David was different, but just as dependent. Where Mara needed emotional support, David needed financial rescue. Mom, the gallery wants to showcase my paintings, but I need $2,000 for framing and transportation. I never hesitated. I'd transfer the money, drive to his apartment with groceries, and listen to his dreams about becoming the next great artist. You believe in me when no one else does, he'd say, hugging me tight. I'll pay you back when I make it big. I never asked for the money back. His dreams felt like mine. Claire was the most demanding, but also the most grateful. When her husband walked out, I was the one who helped her pack, who drove the U-Haul to her new apartment, who co-signed the lease because her credit was destroyed. I can't do this without you, Elena, she'd cry. You're not just my sister. You're my best friend. Sunday dinners at my house became sacred. Every week, they'd gather around my dining room table, Mara flying in from Seattle when she could, David biking over from his studio apartment, Claire bringing wine and stories from her real estate adventures. I'd cook for hours, their favorite meals, Mara's beloved enchiladas, David's preferred vegetarian lasagna, Claire's weakness for my apple pie. To Elena, they'd toast, raising their glasses. The glue that holds this crazy family together, I'd beam, refilling their plates, asking about their weeks, offering advice and encouragement. These dinners were my favorite part of life. The kitchen filled with laughter, the dining room warm with conversation, the feeling that I had created something beautiful and necessary. Even my ex-husband Robert would sometimes join us. You know, Elena, he'd say after a few drinks, you're remarkable. These kids are so lucky to have you. We'd been divorced for 8 years, but in those moments, it felt like we were still a family. Like my love had been enough to heal even our broken marriage. I lived for their crises because that's when I felt most useful. When Mara called sobbing about her breakup with her fiancé, I drove 12 hours to be with her. When David's apartment was broken into, I was there within an hour, helping him file police reports and buy new locks. When Claire's mother-in-law had a stroke, I was the one who researched nursing homes and drove her to every facility tour. What would we do without you? Became their family motto. And honestly, I never wanted to find out. I thought I was building something permanent, a family that valued love and loyalty above everything else. I thought I was teaching them what unconditional support looked like. I had no idea I was teaching them to take me for granted. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was folding David's laundry. He'd dropped it off the night before with a sheepish grin and a promise to get his life together soon, when Dr. Patterson's office called. Mrs. Martinez, we need you to come in to discuss your mammogram results. My hands went still on David's favorite band t-shirt. In 15 years of routine screenings, I'd never gotten a call like this. Is everything okay? I asked, though the careful tone in the nurse's voice already told me it wasn't. The doctor just wants to go over some areas of concern with you. Can you come in Thursday morning? Areas of concern. The phrase echoed in my head as I hung up. I stood in my laundry room, surrounded by my son's clothes and the familiar smell of fabric softener, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. For the first time in years, I needed someone else to be strong for me. I called Mara first. She always answered when I called. It was one of the things I loved most about our relationship. Hey, Mom, what's up? Her voice was bright, but distracted. I could hear the click of computer keys in the background. Honey, I need to tell you something. The doctor wants to see me about my mammogram. They found something that needs a closer look. The typing stopped. Oh, hold on, Mom. I heard muffled voices, then Mara came back. Mom, can this wait? I'm literally walking into the biggest presentation of my career. The Henderson account I've been working on for 6 months. It's happening right now. Of course, I said automatically. I just thought you should know. You're probably fine, Mom. You know how doctors are. They have to check everything. We'll talk later, okay? I love you. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone, a strange hollowness forming in my chest. When Mara had her pregnancy scare in college, I'd driven through a snowstorm to be with her. When she'd been rejected from her first-choice graduate program, I'd stayed on the phone with her until 3 a.m. But she couldn't spare 5 minutes when I was scared. I called David next. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Mom, everything okay? It's kind of early." "David, I might need some support next week. I have to go back to the doctor about some test results." "Oh man, Mom, you're always so dramatic about doctor visits." I heard him yawning. "Remember when you thought you had a heart attack and it was just acid reflux? You'll be fine like always. You're tough as nails." "This feels different," I said quietly. "Mom, you worry too much. That's your problem. You'll handle whatever it is. You always do. Hey, speaking of handling things, do you think you could spot me money for groceries this week? I'm totally broke until my commission check comes in." I found myself saying yes, even as something cold settled in my stomach. My last call was to Claire. She picked up immediately. "Elena, perfect timing. I just listed the Morrison house, and I'm so stressed about the showing tomorrow." "Claire, I need to tell you something important." "Oh, good. You always give the best advice. So the house has this weird smell in the basement, and I don't know if I should—" "Claire." My voice was sharper than usual. "They found something on my mammogram." Silence. Then, "Oh, Elena, you're the strongest person I know. Whatever it is, you'll handle it. You always land on your feet." That phrase, "you always handle it," rang in my ears as I hung up. For the first time, I noticed how quickly they all assumed I'd be fine, how little they actually listened, how easily they moved past my fear to their own needs. But I told myself it was nothing. They were busy. I was probably overreacting. I had no idea this was just the beginning. The biopsy results came back on a Friday afternoon. Dr. Patterson sat across from me in his office, his hands folded on my file, speaking words that seemed to float in the air like smoke. "Invasive ductal carcinoma. We need to schedule surgery immediately. Next Thursday would be ideal." Cancer. The word landed in my chest like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples of fear through every part of me. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. For 30 years, I'd been everyone's crisis manager, but I'd never had a crisis of my own this big. I didn't even know how to be scared for myself. That evening, I created a family group chat, something I'd never done before. Usually, I called each of them individually, making sure everyone felt personally attended to. But this felt too big, too urgent for separate conversations. "Family update," I typed, my fingers trembling over the phone screen. "I got my biopsy results today. It's cancer, and I need surgery next Thursday. Could really use you all here with me." I hit send and waited. Mara responded first, 20 minutes later. "Oh, Mom, I wish I could be there, but this is the Henderson client week I've been telling you about. It's make or break for my promotion. I'm sure it's just routine surgery though, right? You're so strong. You've got this. Sending love." My throat tightened. When Mara had her wisdom teeth removed in college, I'd flown to Seattle and stayed for a week, making her soup and managing her pain medication schedule. When she'd had a minor fender bender last year, I'd driven 4 hours just to hug her and make sure she was really okay. David's response came an hour later. "Wow, Mom, that's scary. But you know what? I have total faith in you. You always bounce back from everything. Besides, modern medicine is amazing. I'm sure it's totally treatable. Love you." I remembered sitting in the emergency room with David for 6 hours when he'd broken his wrist skateboarding at 25. I'd held his hand through the x-rays, filled out all his paperwork, and stayed up all night making sure he didn't have a concussion. He'd said I was his hero for being there. Now he had total faith. I'd handle cancer surgery alone. Claire's message didn't come until the next morning. "Elena, you know I'm terrible with medical stuff. It makes me so anxious. But you're literally the strongest person I know. You handled Mom's cancer so beautifully. I'll try to visit afterward if I can get away from showings. This housing market is absolutely insane right now." I stared at that message for a long time. When Claire had her gallbladder surgery 2 years ago, I'd taken a week off work to be her recovery companion. I'd slept on her couch, helped her shower, drove her to every follow-up appointment. She'd cried and told me I was the best sister in the world. Now, my cancer was making her anxious, so she'd try to visit if she could get away. I set my phone down and looked around my empty house. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful, but hollow. Like something essential had been scooped out of my life, leaving just the shell. Over the next few days, I found myself noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. How they called me when they needed something, but rarely asked how I was doing. How conversations always centered on their problems, their successes, their dramas. How quickly they changed the subject when I tried to share something difficult. I remembered every time I'd dropped everything for them, every canceled plan, every rearranged schedule, every emergency I'd made my priority. The pattern was so clear now, it took my breath away. They'd learned to see me as unbreakable because I'd never let them see me broken. And now, facing the scariest moment of my life, I realized I'd trained them so well that they couldn't even imagine I might need them. The erosion had been so gradual I hadn't noticed. But sitting alone in my kitchen, I felt the full weight of my invisibility settling around me like dust. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. I sat in the preoperative waiting area at 6 a.m., wearing the hospital gown that made me feel small and vulnerable. My surgery was scheduled for 8 a.m., and I'd arrived early, hoping against hope that one of them might surprise me and show up. The pre-op area was filled with other patients and their families. To my left, an elderly man held his wife's hand while their daughter rubbed her mother's shoulders. "We'll be right here when you wake up, Mom," the daughter whispered. "Dad and I aren't going anywhere." To my right, a woman about my age sat surrounded by what looked like half her extended family: her husband, 2 adult sons, a daughter-in-law, and even a teenage granddaughter who'd clearly been pulled out of school to be there. They were all talking softly, taking turns holding her hand, making gentle jokes to ease her nerves. I clutched my phone, checking it every few minutes. Nothing. The nurse, a kind woman named Patricia, with graying hair and gentle eyes, approached with my pre-surgery paperwork. She glanced around the empty chairs beside my bed. "Is your family running late, honey?" she asked gently, her voice carrying the practiced compassion of someone who'd seen every kind of human situation. My throat closed up. I managed to croak out, "They're busy." Patricia's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, not to judgment, but to a deeper kindness that somehow made it worse. "Well, we'll take good care of you," she said, patting my shoulder. "Sometimes the medical team becomes family for a little while." I nodded, not trusting my voice. As Patricia walked away, I heard the woman to my right telling her daughter, "Thank you for being here, sweetheart. I know you had to reschedule your presentation." The daughter, probably in her 30s, dressed in a business suit, squeezed her mother's hand. "Of course, Mom. I wouldn't be anywhere else. Work can wait. You're what matters." Those words hit me like a physical blow. I wouldn't be anywhere else. I tried to remember the last time one of my children had said something like that to me, the last time they'd chosen me over work, over convenience, over their own comfort. I came up empty. When Mara had her appendectomy 3 years ago, I'd canceled a weekend trip I'd been planning for months. When David had his motorcycle accident, I'd left work in the middle of an important meeting. When Claire had her panic attack during her divorce proceedings, I'd driven through a thunderstorm at midnight to sit with her. Every time they'd said, "Thank you for being here." But now, I realized it wasn't gratitude. It was expectation. They thanked me the way you thank the sun for rising. Automatic. Assumed. A new patient was wheeled in across from me, a man probably in his 60s. His entire family trailed behind the gurney like a parade: his wife, 3 adult children, several grandchildren, and even a small dog. Someone had somehow snuck in under a blanket. They were loud and chaotic and completely devoted to making sure he felt loved. "Grandpa Joe's army is here," one of the grandchildren announced, making everyone laugh, including the nurses. I watched this beautiful, messy display of family loyalty and felt something inside me crumble. Not just sadness, humiliation. Here I was, a woman who'd spent 3 decades building what I thought was a close, loving family, and I was about to go into cancer surgery completely alone. The anesthesiologist arrived to take me to the operating room. As they wheeled my bed down the hallway, I caught glimpses of all those waiting rooms filled with people keeping vigil for their loved ones. Patricia walked beside my gurney. "You know what, hun?" she said quietly. "Some of the strongest people I know are the ones who show up for themselves when no one else does." I closed my eyes as the operating room doors swung open, swallowing the tears that threatened to fall. For the first time in my life, I was learning what it felt like to be forgotten by the people who were supposed to love me most. The surgery was supposed to be routine, in and out the same day, but my body had other plans. I woke up in recovery to Dr. Patterson's concerned face hovering over me. "Elena, you've developed some complications. We're going to need to keep you here for observation, possibly up to 2 weeks." 2 weeks? At the words floated through my post-anesthesia haze like a bad dream. I'd never been away from home for 2 weeks in my entire adult life. That first day, I called Mara as soon as I could focus on my phone screen. "Mom, how did the surgery go?" Her voice sounded distant, distracted. "There were complications, honey. I have to stay in the hospital for a while, maybe 2 weeks." My voice was weak, scratchy from the breathing tube. "Oh no, that's terrible. But you're okay, right? I mean, you're going to be fine?" "The doctor says I'll recover, but I'm going to need help when I get home. I can't lift anything, can't drive for a while." "Mom, that's what I was thinking about. I looked into those care services online for you. There are some really good companies that can send someone to check on you, help with groceries and stuff. I can email you some links." Care services, strangers. I'd held her hand through every crisis of her 32 years, and she wanted to hire strangers to take care of me. "I was hoping maybe you could visit," I whispered. "Oh, Mom, I wish I could, but this Henderson project is going into overdrive. Maybe in a few weeks, when things calm down." Day 3, I called David, my son, my baby, the one I'd supported through every dream and disappointment. "Hey, Mom, how are you feeling?" He sounded like he was eating something. "Not great, sweetheart. The doctor says I need help when I get home. I can't even get myself water right now." "Wow, that sucks. Maybe Claire can check on you? She lives closer than I do." "David, I was hoping you might be able to stay with me for a few days, just until I'm steadier on my feet." "Mom, you know my living situation is kind of crazy right now. Plus, I'm terrible at medical stuff. You know that. You'd probably be better off with a professional." A professional. My son thought I'd be better off with a professional than with him. Day 5, I tried Claire. "Elena, how are you holding up in there?" "It's been hard, Claire. Really hard. The doctor says when I get discharged, I'll need someone to stay with me or check on me several times a day." "Oh, honey, I wish I could help, but this is my busiest season. I'm showing houses literally every day this week. The market is insane right now. I can't afford to take time off." "What about next week?" "Let me check my calendar and text you, okay? Maybe I can stop by for an hour or two." An hour or two, to check on her sister who'd just had cancer surgery. By day 7, my daily calls became shorter. My voice grew weaker, not just from the surgery but from something deeper. A kind of spiritual exhaustion I'd never felt before. "Maybe the hospital social worker can connect you with some resources," Mara suggested on day 8. "I'm sure there are community programs for people in your situation," David offered on day 9. People in my situation. As if I were a charity case, not their mother. On day 10, I lay in my hospital bed staring at my phone. I'd called them every single day, my voice getting smaller and more desperate each time. And every day, they found new ways to suggest I handle it myself or find professional help. That afternoon, for the first time in 10 days, I didn't call anyone. I set my phone on the bedside table and stared out the window at the parking lot below. Families came and went, visiting their loved ones, bringing flowers and balloons and their simple presents. I realized something that took my breath away. I'd spent 30 years training them that Elena Martinez always managed alone. I'd never asked for help before, so they didn't know how to give it. I'd been so strong for so long, that they couldn't see me as anything else. The silence felt like drowning, but underneath it, something else stirred. Something that had been sleeping for decades was starting to wake up. I was done calling. I came home on a Tuesday afternoon to a house that felt like a tomb. The taxi driver helped me to my front door, my legs shaking from 2 weeks of hospital bed rest. As his car pulled away, I stood on my porch fumbling with keys that felt impossibly heavy in my trembling hands. The spare key under the flower pot, the one I'd given emergency access to all 3 of my children, was still there, unused. The front door swung open to reveal the life I'd left behind. Mail was scattered across the entryway floor, where it had fallen through the slot, 2 weeks' worth of bills and advertisements creating a paper carpet. The air was stale and thick, smelling of forgotten food and closed-up spaces. In the kitchen, the bananas I'd bought for my last pre-surgery grocery run had turned black on the counter, fruit flies dancing around them in lazy circles. I walked through my house like a stranger touring ruins. In the living room, the throw pillows I'd carefully arranged before leaving for surgery lay scattered and flat. Dust motes floated in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through windows I couldn't remember being so dirty. The milk in my refrigerator had soured, its smell hitting me like a physical blow when I opened the door. My body, still tender from surgery and weak from the hospital stay, couldn't handle any of it. I couldn't lift the gallon of spoiled milk. I couldn't bend to pick up the mail. I couldn't reach the pull cord to open the blinds that had been closed for 2 weeks. I sank onto my kitchen floor in my robe, my back against the cabinet, and looked around at the home I'd taken such pride in. The home where I'd hosted Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, where I'd created a warm center for my family to orbit around. Now it felt abandoned, like a stage set after the play had ended and everyone had gone home. On the counter, a stack of Get Well cards caught my eye, cards I'd sent to others over the years that they'd returned to me on various occasions. "Thank you for being there when I needed you most," read one from Claire after her divorce. "I couldn't have gotten through this without you," said another from Mara after her miscarriage. "You're my hero, Mom," declared a card from David after his car accident. The irony was suffocating. I'd been their hero when they needed saving, but now I couldn't even save myself from spoiled milk and unopened mail. That first night, I lay in my empty bed listening to sounds I'd never noticed before. The house settled around me with creaks and sighs, the refrigerator hummed alone in the kitchen, and somewhere a faucet dripped with metronomic persistence. The silence between these ordinary sounds felt vast and cold. I ordered groceries online with shaking hands, paying delivery fees I couldn't really afford because I couldn't drive, couldn't lift, couldn't manage the simplest tasks of daily living. When the delivery driver knocked, I had to ask him to carry the bags to my kitchen because I was too weak. He was kind but quick, eager to move on to customers who weren't pale, trembling women in bathrobes asking for help they shouldn't need. For 3 days, I moved through my house like a ghost haunting her own life. I ate soup straight from cans because I couldn't lift heavy pots. I slept on the couch because climbing stairs exhausted me. I wore the same robe because reaching into my closet felt impossible. On the 4th night, sitting on my kitchen floor again because it was easier than standing, I looked at my phone and realized something that made my chest cave in. I had nowhere to go and no one to call. For the first time in my 58 years, I was truly, completely alone. The woman who had been everyone's emergency contact had no emergency contact of her own. I pressed my face to my knees and sobbed until no more tears would come, the sound echoing through my empty house like a prayer no one would ever hear. On my 7th day home from the hospital, I decided to tackle the guest room closet. It wasn't about energy, I barely had enough to shower, but about desperate need for control. If I couldn't control my health, my family's absence, or my overwhelming loneliness, maybe I could control one small corner of my house. The closet was where I kept what I called my memory boxes, containers filled with cards, letters, and photos from over the years. As I pulled down a shoebox labeled Family, 1995, 2010, my weakened grip failed me. The box tumbled to the floor, spilling its contents across the carpet like confetti made of memories. I lowered myself carefully to the floor, my surgical sight still tender, and began gathering the scattered papers. Birthday cards from the kids, thank you notes, graduation announcements, random drawings David had made in elementary school. Each piece of paper represented a moment when I'd felt needed, valued, essential to their happiness. There was Mara's card from when she graduated college. Mom, I couldn't have done this without your constant support and encouragement. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. David's note from when he moved to his first apartment. Thanks for helping me get set up, Mom. You always know exactly what I need. Love you. Claire's letter from after Mom's funeral. Elena, watching you take care of Mom with such grace and strength showed me what real love looks like. Thank you for carrying all of us through the hardest time of our lives. I held each memory, feeling the weight of all that gratitude, all that love. These weren't fake sentiments. They'd meant every word when they wrote them. So what had changed? When had I stopped being the person they turned to and become the person they turned away from? That's when I found it. Tucked between a Mother's Day card from 2003 and David's high school graduation program was a piece of my own stationery, yellowed with age. My handwriting, but not my usual careful script. This was angry writing, the pen pressed hard enough to leave indentations on the page behind it. It was a letter I'd written but never sent. The date at the top read November 15, 1987, 6 months before my own mother died. Dear Mom, it began, and my heart stopped. I'm writing this letter I'll never send because I need to get these words out somewhere. I'm exhausted. For 20 years, I've been your emotional caretaker, your problem solver, your go-to person for every crisis. When Dad left, I was there. When you lost your job, I was there. When you were lonely, sad, angry, or scared, I was always there. But when I had my miscarriage last year, you told me to focus on the positive and change the subject to your neighbor's drama. When Robert and I were having marriage problems, you said I was probably just being too sensitive and started talking about your own dating prospects. When I told you I was thinking about going back to school, you laughed and said, "At your age, with 2 small children? That's not realistic, Elena." I realize now that you don't know how to love me back because I never required it. I made myself so indispensable to your happiness that you never learned to consider mine. I trained you to see me as strong, capable, unbreakable Elena who always figures it out. I've become invisible to you except when you need something. And the worst part is, I think I'm doing the same thing to my own children. I'm so busy being their solution to everything that I'm not teaching them how to be mine. I don't know how to break this cycle. I don't know how to need people who've never learned to take care of me. Love shouldn't be this one-sided, but I don't know how to make it different. Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing into everyone else's needs, and nobody notices I'm gone. The letter was unsigned, unfinished. I stared at my own words from 37 years ago, my hands shaking. I'd written this before Mara was even in kindergarten, before David could ride a bike. I'd seen the pattern then, felt the exhaustion, recognized the cycle, and I'd done it anyway. I'd recreated my mother's relationship with me in my relationships with my children. Sitting on my bedroom floor, surrounded by decades of gratitude that had somehow morphed into entitlement, I finally understood. I hadn't failed them. I had failed myself. I sat on that bedroom floor for hours, reading and rereading the letter I'd written 37 years ago. The woman who had penned those words was someone I'd forgotten existed. Someone who could see clearly, who could name the problem, who had been drowning and knew it. That woman had been trying to save me before I even knew I needed saving. I carefully folded the letter and carried it to my kitchen table, where I set it next to a notebook I'd bought years ago but never used. The cover was deep blue with gold edges, the kind of journal that demanded important thoughts, not grocery lists. For the first time since coming home from the hospital, I opened it and began to write. Day 1 of seeing clearly, I wrote at the top of the first page. Today I found a letter from my younger self, and she was smarter than I gave her credit for. The words flowed like water through a broken dam. I wrote about every time I'd said, "It's okay," when it wasn't okay. Every time I'd minimized my own needs to avoid seeming needy. Every time I'd smiled through disappointment and told my children not to worry about me. I taught them that my feelings don't matter, I wrote. I taught them that Elena Martinez is unbreakable, that she doesn't need comfort or support, or even basic consideration. I trained them so well that when I finally broke down and needed them, they couldn't even see me. The next morning, David called. His ringtone, a cheerful melody I'd assigned to him years ago, jangled through my quiet house. For the first time in my life, I didn't answer immediately. I let it ring while I finished my coffee. I let it go to voicemail while I watched the morning light shift across my kitchen table. When I finally listened to the message, his voice sounded genuinely confused. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Hope you're feeling better. Also, I'm a little short this month. Could you maybe spot me for groceries? Call me back when you get this." I stared at my phone. Even his checking in call was actually a request for money. When had that become normal? I didn't call him back that day. That afternoon, Mara texted, "Mom, can you send me Grandma's apple pie recipe? I want to make it for a dinner party tomorrow night." The old Elena would have immediately typed out the detailed recipe, probably adding tips and encouraging words about how wonderful she was for continuing family traditions. Instead, I wrote back, "I'll look for it when I have time." 3 hours later, she texted again, "Mom, did you see my message about the recipe?" I had seen it. I chose not to respond immediately. For the first time in 30 years, Mara's urgent need was not my emergency. That evening, Claire called. "Elena, thank God you're finally home. I need your advice about this house showing tomorrow. The sellers are being impossible, and I don't know what to do." I listened to her familiar spiral of work stress, waiting for the moment she'd ask how I was feeling, how my recovery was going, whether I needed anything. The moment never came. "Claire," I said quietly, interrupting her mid-sentence about difficult clients. "I just got out of the hospital. I had cancer surgery." "Oh, right, of course. How are you feeling?" "I'm struggling," I said honestly. "It's been really hard being alone." "Well, you know what they say. This too shall pass. Anyway, about these sellers." I hung up while she was still talking. In my journal that night, I wrote, "They don't know how to love me because I never taught them how, but it's not too late to start teaching different lessons." Somewhere deep in my chest, something that had been sleeping for decades began to stir. Not anger. Anger was too hot, too consuming. This was something cooler and more sustainable. This was clarity. This was self-respect. This was the quiet fire of a woman who had finally decided she mattered too. The awakening had begun. The pottery class advertisement caught my eye while I was scrolling through the community center website, looking for something, anything, to fill the vast emptiness of my recovering days. Beginner's wheel throwing, Tuesdays 7 to 9 p.m. No experience necessary. Come create something beautiful with your hands. I'd mentioned wanting to try pottery exactly once, 3 years ago at a Sunday dinner. David had laughed and said, "Mom, you're way too practical for art." Claire had added, "When would you have time for hobbies?" Mara had been on her phone and missed the comment entirely. I'd never brought it up again. Now, sitting in my quiet kitchen with my journal open beside me, I clicked register and paid the fee before I could change my mind. For once, I wasn't asking anyone's permission or checking anyone's schedule. This was for me. The first class was awkward. My hands felt clumsy on the clay, and I was easily the oldest person there by 10 years. But something about the quiet concentration, the feeling of creating rather than managing, settled into my bones like medicine. "I like coming here because no one needs anything from me," I wrote in my journal that night. For 2 hours, I'm just Elena, learning something new. When David called the next week, asking for grocery money again, I found myself saying something that surprised us both. "I can't do that anymore, David." "What do you mean you can't? Are you broke or something?" "I mean I'm not going to." The words felt foreign in my mouth, but not wrong. "You're 29 years old. You need to figure out groceries yourself." The the silence stretched between us. I could practically hear him trying to process this new version of his mother. But Mom, I'm really struggling right now with the art stuff, and I know you're struggling, but me giving you money every month isn't helping you learn to manage your finances. Since when do you not help me? Since now. I hung up feeling shaky but oddly proud. That afternoon, I opened my own savings account for the first time in 15 years. The account I'd shared with Robert during our marriage had become the family emergency fund after our divorce, available to anyone who needed it. This new account was just mine. The pottery class led to coffee with Margaret, a retired teacher who threw beautiful bowls and had no idea I had children. She knew me as the woman who was surprisingly good at centering clay, despite her tendency to overthink every movement. You should try the intermediate class, Margaret suggested over coffee one Wednesday afternoon. You've got natural instinct for the wheel. Natural instinct. When had anyone talked about what I was naturally good at, rather than what I was useful for? Coffee with Margaret led to discovering the hiking group that met Saturday mornings at the state park. I'd always loved walking, but had never prioritized it over family needs. Now, with my children scattered and indifferent, Saturday mornings were mine. The hiking group introduced me to Linda and Patricia, two women my age who were navigating their own versions of life changes. Linda was recently widowed. Patricia's last child had just left for college. Neither of them knew I was Elena who always fixes everything. To them, I was just Elena who was learning to use hiking poles and occasionally got winded on steep trails. When Claire called demanding to know why I hadn't responded to her texts about co-signing another lease, I said simply, "Because I'm not going to co-sign for you anymore." "What's gotten into you lately?" she asked, her voice sharp with frustration. "I'm learning to put myself first sometimes." "That doesn't sound like you." "Maybe that's the problem." In therapy, another Tuesday appointment I'd made for myself, Dr. Reeves helped me understand what I was doing. "You're establishing boundaries," she explained. "After years of being available for everyone else's emergencies, you're creating space for your own life." "It feels selfish," I admitted. "Taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. You can't pour from an empty cup." I thought about that phrase as I sat in my pottery class, hands covered in clay, creating something that belonged only to me. For the first time in decades, my cup was slowly beginning to fill. The first crack in their certainty came 3 weeks after I started pottery class. Mara called on a Thursday evening, her voice tight with panic. "Mom, thank God you picked up. I'm having a total meltdown. Jake and I had this huge fight, and I think we might break up. I need you to talk me through this." In the old days, I would have dropped everything. I would have made tea, settled into my favorite chair, and spent the next 2 hours dissecting every word of their argument, offering comfort and advice until she felt better. Instead, I glanced at the clock. My hiking group was meeting early the next morning, and I wanted to get to bed at a reasonable hour. "That sounds really difficult, sweetheart," I said calmly. "I hope you two can work it out." Silence. Then, "That's it? You're not going to help me figure out what to do?" "You're 32 years old, Mara. You don't need me to figure out your relationship for you." "But I always talk to you about this stuff. You always know what to say." "I'm sure you'll know what to say too, when you think about it." After I hung up, I sat in my living room feeling the strange new weight of my own boundaries. My phone buzzed with 3 text messages from Mara over the next hour, each one more desperate than the last. I read them but didn't respond. She'd figure it out. She always had before I got involved. The next incident was with David. He showed up at my door on a Sunday afternoon, looking sheepish and carrying a plastic bag. "Hey, Mom, I brought my laundry. My machine's broken again, and I thought maybe I could throw it in with yours like old times." I looked at the bag, then at my son's expectant face. "My washing machine isn't a laundromat, David." "Come on, Mom. It's just one load. You're always doing laundry anyway." "Actually, I'm not always doing laundry, and when I am, it's my laundry." His face shifted through confusion, hurt, and finally irritation. "Why are you being so weird lately? It's like you don't even want to help your own kids anymore." "I want to have a relationship with you that isn't based on me solving your problems." "Since when?" "Since now." He left with his laundry bag, shaking his head like I'd lost my mind. But the real shift happened with Claire. She'd been calling me every few days, leaving increasingly frustrated voicemails about work stress, dating disasters, and general life complaints. I'd been letting most of them go to voicemail and responding with brief texts. "Sounds tough," or "I'm sure you'll figure it out." Finally, she showed up at my house unannounced on a Wednesday evening, clearly expecting our usual routine. She'd vent, I'd listen and advise. Then I'd cook dinner while she scrolled through her phone. Instead, she found me putting on my jacket. "Where are you going?" she demanded, following me toward the door. "Pottery class." "Since when do you take pottery class?" "Since 3 weeks ago." "Well, cancel it. I need to talk to you about this nightmare showing I had today. These buyers were completely unreasonable and I'm not canceling my class, Claire." She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "But I'm upset. I need my sister." "I'll be back around 9:30 if you want to call me then." "Elena, what is wrong with you? You're acting like you don't even care about your own family anymore." I turned to face her fully, my hand on the doorknob. "I care about my family. But I also care about myself now. That's new, isn't it?" I left her standing in my driveway, mouth open. At pottery class, Margaret noticed my distracted energy. "Everything okay?" she asked as we centered our clay. "I think my family is starting to realize I'm not the same person I used to be." "How does that feel?" I considered the question as my hands guided the clay upward. "Terrifying," I admitted, "but also powerful, like I'm finally learning what my own voice sounds like." On the wheel, my bowl took shape, imperfect but mine, created by my hands for no one's needs but my own. For the first time in my life, I was becoming indispensable to myself. Thanksgiving had always been my masterpiece. For 15 years, I'd spent weeks planning the menu, days prepping, and the entire morning of orchestrating a feast that brought my scattered family together around my dining room table. It was the one day a year when I could guarantee they'd all be in the same room, grateful and present. This year, I left a note taped to my front door. "Thanksgiving dinner is at 6 p.m. at Romano's restaurant on 5th Street. I've made a reservation for 6 under Martinez. No gifts, no fuss, just dinner together if you'd like to join me. Mom." I arrived at Romano's at 5:45, wearing a dress I'd bought for myself the week before. Deep emerald green, something I'd never have chosen when I was trying to blend into everyone else's needs. The hostess led me to our table, and I sat down with my back to the door, ordering a glass of wine while I waited. David arrived first, looking confused and slightly annoyed. "Mom, what's this about? Where's dinner?" "Dinner is here," I said calmly, gesturing to the menu. "Order whatever you'd like." Claire came next, her heels clicking impatiently across the restaurant floor. "Elena, I don't understand. Are you sick? Is this some kind of breakdown?" "I'm actually feeling better than I have in years." Mara was the last to arrive, her face flushed from rushing. She slid into the seat across from me, her eyes darting around the restaurant like she was looking for hidden cameras. "Mom, seriously, what's going on? This isn't like you at all." Maybe that's the problem. We ordered our meals in awkward silence. The server, a young woman probably Mara's age, was cheerful and attentive, the kind of service I'd trained my family not to expect from me. When our entrees arrived, Mara finally exploded. "Okay, I can't take this anymore. What's wrong with you? For months you've been acting so cold, so distant. You don't answer calls right away. You don't help with problems anymore. You don't ask about our lives. It's like you don't even care about your own family." I set down my fork and looked at each of them. These 3 people I'd loved more than my own life for decades. "I'm not cold, Mara. I'm just not invisible anymore." What's that supposed to mean? It means for 30 years, I've been here whenever any of you needed me. When you had postpartum depression, I flew to Seattle and stayed for 3 weeks. When David's apartment was robbed, I was there in an hour with locks and groceries and comfort. When Claire's marriage fell apart, I packed her entire house and co-signed her lease. They shifted uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps sensing where this was going. But when I had cancer surgery and spent 2 weeks alone in the hospital, where were you? The silence at our table was deafening. Around us, Other families laughed and talked, but our little corner had gone completely still. "You were all too busy," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "Too busy with work, with your own problems, with your own lives. And that's when I realized something important. I taught you to treat me this way." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, we didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask. For 2 weeks, I called each of you every day, getting weaker and more scared. And every conversation ended with you telling me I'd be fine because I always am. None of you visited. None of you even sent flowers." David stared at his plate. Claire's face had gone pale. "I'm not angry," I said gently, "but I'm done being the only one who shows up. I'm done being Elena who always handles everything, who never needs anything, who disappears into everyone else's emergencies." I picked up my wine glass, my hand perfectly steady. "I love you all, but I love myself now too. And if you want a relationship with me going forward, it needs to be mutual." The power had shifted completely. For the first time in their lives, they were chasing my attention instead of the other way around. And I was finally okay with letting them wait. The call came on a Tuesday morning in February, 4 months after our Thanksgiving confrontation. I was getting ready for pottery class, humming while I packed my tools into the canvas bag Margaret had given me for Christmas, when my phone rang. "Ms. Martinez, this is Harrison and Associates, estate attorneys in Phoenix. I'm calling about your great-aunt Esperanza Rodriguez. I understand you were her closest living relative." I nearly dropped the phone. Aunt Esperanza, my grandmother's sister, a woman I'd met exactly 3 times at family reunions when I was a child. She'd been the family legend, the spinster aunt who'd never married, traveled the world, and sent postcards from places like Morocco and Thailand that my mother would read aloud with barely concealed disapproval. "Ms. Rodriguez passed away last month," the lawyer continued. "She left her estate to you. It's substantial, approximately $400,000, plus her home in Sedona." $400,000. I sat down heavily into my kitchen chair, staring out at the bird feeder I'd hung for myself last month. Something I'd always wanted but never bothered with when I was busy managing everyone else's wants. The old Elena would have immediately called her children to share the news, would have asked David if this could finally help him get his art career off the ground, would have wondered if Mara might want help with her mortgage, or if Claire needed investment capital for her real estate dreams. The new Elena hung up the phone and sat in perfect silence, thinking about a woman she barely knew who had somehow seen something in me worth rewarding. That afternoon, I called the art retreat center in Tuscany that Margaret had mentioned in passing. She'd gone there the previous summer and returned glowing, full of stories about painting landscapes and learning to cook authentic Italian food. "I'd like to book a month-long stay," I told the coordinator, "starting in March." "Wonderful! Are you celebrating something special?" I looked around my quiet kitchen, at the pottery bowl I'd made sitting on the counter, at the hiking boots by the door, at the journal where I'd been writing my way back to myself. "Yes," I said, "I'm celebrating my life. I didn't tell my children about the inheritance. I didn't tell them about Italy. For the first time in my adult life, something wonderful was mine alone to savor, plan, and anticipate." I booked the retreat, applied for a passport, bought art supplies, and researched the Tuscan countryside with the excitement of a teenager planning her first solo adventure. When David called asking for rent money, I simply said, "I can't help with that." When Mara needed relationship advice about Jake, I listened for exactly 10 minutes before saying, "I trust you to figure this out." I left for Italy on a Thursday morning in March. Margaret drove me to the airport, and I posted a single photo on Facebook from the departure gate. Me with my carry-on bag and the biggest smile I'd worn in years. The caption read, "Month-long art retreat in Tuscany. Sometimes the best adventures begin when you stop waiting for permission to live your own life." I turned off my phone before boarding the plane. I didn't see their responses until I was sitting in a cafe in Florence 5 days later, eating gelato and sketching the Duomo. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages. Mara. "Mom, where are you? Why didn't you tell us you were traveling?" David. Are you seriously in Italy right now? Since when do you travel alone? Claire. Elena, I'm worried about you. This isn't normal behavior. Please call us. I ordered another espresso and typed back a single message to our family group chat. Having a wonderful time. We'll call when I'm ready. Love you all. Then I turned my phone off again and walked back into my beautiful, solitary life. For the first time ever, they were the ones waiting for my attention. And I was finally okay with letting them wait. I returned from Italy on a warm April evening, my skin golden from Mediterranean sun, and my suitcase filled with sketchbooks, pottery shards I'd collected from ancient ruins, and a confidence I'd never possessed before. The month in Tuscany had been a revelation, waking up each morning accountable to no one but myself, learning to paint olive groves, eating meals slowly, while watching sunsets that belonged to me alone. My house felt different when I walked through the front door. Not smaller exactly, but less central to the universe. It was simply the place where Elena Martinez lived, not the command center for everyone else's emergencies. I'd been home for 3 days, quietly unpacking and readjusting to my solitary routine, when the doorbell rang on a Thursday evening. Through the peephole, I saw David standing on my porch, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. He was holding something. Flowers, I realized. When had my son ever brought me flowers? I opened the door and found him looking genuinely uncertain, an expression I'd rarely seen on his face since childhood. Hi, Mom. His voice was quieter than usual, tentative. Can I come in? I stepped aside to let him pass, noticing how he glanced around my living room as if seeing it for the first time. The photos from Italy were scattered on my coffee table next to my new sketchbook. A pottery piece I'd made in Siena sat on the mantel. Small changes, but they clearly registered with him. These are for you, he said, holding out the flowers. Sunflowers, my favorite, though I couldn't remember ever telling him that. I was hoping we could talk. I took the flowers and went to the kitchen to find a vase, aware of him following behind me. He sat heavily at my kitchen table, in the same chair where he'd asked for money countless times over the years. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said at Thanksgiving, about us not being there when you needed us. He paused, running his hands through his hair. I've been thinking about it a lot, actually. I arranged the sunflowers carefully, taking my time. What have you been thinking? I realized something pretty awful. I can't remember the last time I asked how you were doing and actually listened to the answer. I can't remember the last time I called just to talk to you, not to ask for something. His voice cracked slightly, and I felt the familiar tug of maternal instinct to comfort him. But I didn't move from my position at the counter. I waited. When you were in the hospital, I told myself you'd be fine because you're always fine. But that was bullshit, wasn't it? You weren't fine. You were scared and alone, and I couldn't see past my own stuff to realize you needed me. I turned to face him, leaning against the counter. Yes, I was scared. And yes, I was alone. I'm sorry, Mom. Really, truly sorry. Not because I want anything from you, but because I love you and I've been a terrible son. The old Elena would have rushed to reassure him, would have said it was okay, would have minimized her own hurt to make him feel better. This Elena simply said, "Thank you for saying that. I want to do better. I want to have a real relationship with you, not just call when I need something. But I don't really know how." I poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him at the table. What does a real relationship look like to you? I guess asking how you're doing and caring about the answer? Visiting just because I want to see you? Maybe learning about this pottery thing you're doing? Those are good places to start. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. I could see him processing this new dynamic, this mother who wasn't rushing to forgive and forget, who wasn't making it easy for him. How was Italy? He asked finally. Really, I want to know. For the first time in our conversation, I smiled. It was transformative. Tell me about it? And for the next hour, I did. 6 months after David's visit, I stand in my backyard garden on a crisp October morning, my hands deep in the rich soil I've spent the season nurturing. The flowers I planted in spring, not for any dinner party or family gathering, but simply because I love the way morning glories climb toward sunlight, are reaching their autumn peak. Purple and blue trumpets cascade over the trellis I built myself, something I never would have attempted when my time belonged to everyone else's projects. Joyce waves from her kitchen window next door, holding up her coffee mug in our now familiar morning greeting. We're seeing a matinee today, a foreign film at the Art House Theater that none of my children would have patience for, but that Joyce and I will discuss over dinner afterward. These friendships I've built in the past year feel different from any relationships I've had before. They're based on who I am now, not who I used to be to other people. My phone buzzes with a text message. It's become a pleasant sound rather than an emergency alert. David. How was pottery class yesterday? I'd love to see what you're working on. Also, want to grab lunch this weekend? No agenda, just want to hang out with my mom. I smile, brushing soil from my hands before typing back. Class was wonderful. I'm making a set of bowls for myself. Lunch Sunday sounds perfect. The transformation in our relationship has been gradual, but profound. David calls twice a week now, and our conversations have texture beyond his crises. He asks about my hiking group, remembers names of my pottery classmates, shares his own struggles without expecting me to solve them. Last month, when I mentioned feeling overwhelmed by some home repairs, he showed up the next Saturday with tools and helped me fix my leaky faucet. He didn't wait to be asked. Mara has been slower to adjust, but progress comes in small moments. She calls less frequently, but listens more carefully. When she visited last month, she brought groceries and cooked dinner for me. A reversal that felt awkward at first, but gradually warmed into something precious. She's still learning that I'm a person with preferences and needs, not just a resource for her emotional emergencies. Claire remains the most resistant to change, still calling with dramatic declarations about her problems and growing frustrated when I don't immediately offer solutions. But even she is learning. Last week, she actually asked about my trip to the pottery studio in nearby Asheville before launching into her latest real estate crisis. I deadhead some spent blooms, adding them to my compost pile, another project for myself, watching kitchen scraps transform into rich soil that will feed next year's garden. The metaphor isn't lost on me. I've learned to compost the parts of my old life that no longer serve me while keeping what remains fertile and true. The morning sun catches my grandmother's ring on my finger. The only piece of jewelry I wear now, a reminder that I come from a line of strong women, even if some of us forgot our strength for a while. I think about Aunt Esperanza, who lived boldly and left me the gift of freedom. I wonder if she recognized something in me that I hadn't yet seen in myself. My phone stays quiet as I finish my garden work. No one needs me to solve an emergency, manage a crisis, or provide immediate comfort. The silence that once felt like abandonment now feels like peace. I've learned the difference between being indispensable and being irreplaceable. Indispensable is about function. What you do for others, how you serve their needs, how they depend on your constant availability. It's exhausting and ultimately hollow because it reduces you to a role rather than celebrating you as a person. Irreplaceable is about essence, who you are, what you bring to relationships through your authentic presence, how you're valued for your thoughts, feelings, and unique perspective on the world. It's sustainable because it's based on mutual respect rather than one-sided service. My children are learning to love me as Elena, not just as mom, the problem solver. And I'm learning to love myself that way too.